I will do, thanks. Yeah. Thank you.
Am I allowed to say next week? We start
That's a word from the sponsor. So, welcome to Ironmongers Hall in the City of London, to everybody who's attending personally and everybody who's joined online. And we are here to talk about Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who is probably the most successful British industrial entrepreneur of the last 20 years in the UK. He is the CEO, the controlling shareholder, and the co-founder of INEOS, a global chemicals group with some $61 billion in annual revenues and 26,000 employees worldwide. INEOS is both a big consumer and supplier of energy, from the Grangemouth chemicals plant to the Forties pipeline. But INEOS's overseas businesses are probably now important to it than those in the UK. And Sir Jim has become a billionaire several times over by backing his hunches. He enjoys doing that in sport as he does in business. INEOS is a principal partner in the Mercedes Formula One team and owns the INEOS Grenadiers cycling team. Also, the Nice and Lausanne football clubs. You've also expressed more than a passing interest in acquiring Manchester United or Chelsea, but the hunch that really mattered most to you, I think, was buying assets that seemed very far from trophies at the time, neglected bulk chemicals businesses in the early noughties. Well, we're here tonight to explore that remarkable career, and we've plenty of time for your questions at the end, both from the floor and also online. And you can post those questions if you have joined us in virtual form by going to the Slido website and putting in the search term Sir Jim. But first of all, it's an INEOS tradition to start any discussion with a mention of the performance of your teams, both good and bad. And I think in this case, the good was Nice beating Troyes 3-2 at the weekend, and the bad was Lausanne losing 2-1 to its crosstown rival. So I suppose the question is, can Nice manager Lucien Favre sleep a little easier at night?
I think, well, we were sort of fairly hands-off with Nice for the first 2 or 3 years, and we've sort of got much more involved as of this summer. I'm sure you're going to ask me the obvious questions about these bigger clubs, but we've got quite focused on what we can actually do with Nice in a more serious way, which we can talk about a bit if you like.
Good. How about Lausanne?
Well, Lausanne is sort of it was our initial foray. It was a sort of educational. It's a nice place. It's a nice place to attract good footballers. But the Nice League the Swiss League is the Swiss League. It's not at the same level as the French League or the UK League, but quite a decent team. Yeah.
Good. Well, we'll come back to some other teams at the end, but I thought we'd turn now to the markets for debt and energy, and you're something of an expert in both of those. You spent some time working at the buyout group Advent when you were younger, and it's fair to say that INEOS's debts threatened your ownership of the group during the great financial crisis. What do you make of debt markets at the moment? How well do you think the government and Bank of England are managing those?
Well, the debt markets come and go. Sometimes they're there, and sometimes they're not. They're obviously, a bit shaky at the moment with what's going on in the world and inflation and interest rates. We've been dealing in the debt markets now for 25 years, and we've never disappointed the banking community. So they feel reasonably comfortable with INEOS. So we don't really have a problem when we go out to market to raise debt. It just becomes a function of pricing and term, those types of things. at present the markets are not great.
Yeah. I mean, you're comfortable with the amount of debt that INEOS has, given that we've seen a very sharp increase in yields for bonds?
Oh, well, I mean, we probably have. I mean, we've got various, we don't really add all the businesses up, but probably in total about 15 billion of debt, and we have 9 or 10 billion of EBITDA. So you think about 15 billion of debt, interest rate probably. But if it was 10%, then obviously it'd be 1.5, so it's 600-700 million out of 10 billion of earnings, so it's not exactly stressed, really.
No, sure.
And the nice thing about debt, which, if you're a businessman in my sort of position running a private company, is it's not a permanent thing, debt. So, you can use debt as a means of finance, but you can repay it. But if you sell equity, that's a one-way road.
Yes,
it's permanent.
Yes. I mean, I think you're fairly much on the record that you wouldn't think of floating INEOS. Yeah.
No.
And let's just turn to energy for a moment. We've seen quite a lot of heat coming out of gas and oil prices in recent months. What do you think the outlook is for winter?
This winter?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think it's going to be very rosy this winter, really. You've got the UK doesn't really have an energy strategy, unfortunately, in my view, that's coherent as maybe compared to the United States. I think, if we have a winter with very little, if you've got a high pressure over the UK and cold temperatures, then we have a problem because wind energy won't work. Gas is, the gas from the North Sea now is only about a third of our requirements, so we have to buy in gas. Most of that gas is on spot. Asia, we're trying to buy the gas away from the UK, so you can bring the ships in, if you can bring the ships in. And the energy balance at the moment in the UK we don't have energy security at the moment in the UK because of the energy policy in the UK, which really is largely. I mean, I think there's quite an interesting story with nuclear, which I think is maybe worth just putting in front of people out there, which I think sort of reflects on energy strategy in the UK. So, if you look at the UK, if you go back to 1990, let's say, 25% of the electricity in the UK was produced from nuclear. Today, it's about 15%. So it's gone down enormously over that period of time. Nuclear obviously is green. There's no carbon footprint for nuclear. In the UK, we have 36 nuclear reactors that are non-operational, and we have 9 that are working. And of the 9 that are working, they're all run by French. None of them are run by UK companies anymore, so we've got 9 that are working. 8 of those are old technology, they're AGRs, gas reactors, which we'll have to close down in the next 3 or 4 years. So that leaves us with 1 nuclear reactor by 2030. And so that would suggest that Hinkley, which is our major nuclear investment, is quite an important decision for government. I think you agree on that basis, because we've only got 1 left by 2030, because they're all old. Yeah. They're all 40 years old, the AGRs. But the technology we've chosen for Hinkley is quite complex and is not proven. And the 2 main reactors that Areva in France, now EDF, have sold have been 1 to Finland and 1 to France.
This is the Flamanville.
Correct. Yeah. Flamanville is the French one. So the one in Finland they've been building for 17 years. And the one in Flamanville they've been building for 16 years, and neither are operational yet.
Yeah, it's not encouraging.
So that is not the finest. And if you look at the US has got 96, nearly 100 nuclear reactors. It's clearly independent now in hydrocarbons and oil and gas because of its shale investments. So it's got a very good base. But
just to pin you down, what do you think the government should do now in terms of energy policy? And
the thing with energy policy is it's not something you can do tomorrow because you need a plan, you need a strategy. It takes time. It's an investment cycle. You can't build a nuclear power station in 6 months or a year. You need a long-term plan. And we change our energy minister every year. We've hardly had an energy minister with a scientific degree. They all do PPE or history or something like that. A bit like the National Opera House being run by a physicist, which I wouldn't recommend. But we run our energy policy in the UK with I mean, they're very intelligent people, but if your background is PPE and you're non-scientific, you're only in the job for a year, you're not going to master the difference between pressurized water reactors, advanced gas reactors, and boiling water reactors. You're just not going to get there, really, which is why we don't have a strategy. But the basis, really, today of an energy policy for the UK should be nuclear and gas. They're the two clean fuels, and transitioning to the green energy of the future. But you have to have a transitional period.
And where does shale oil and gas fit into this? Because that was something the government the last government had very strongly opposed, and now it seems like the gloves are off. And you're an investor, right?
Well, I mean, shale has been very successful, obviously, for the United States, both in terms of its energy independence, but also the amount of investment it's created subsequently, because all the industry in America that has an energy dependence has become extremely competitive. And so they've all, like the chemical industry, for instance, has been extremely successful, whereas it's all dying out in Europe and the UK, obviously. We've never made a penny in the UK in chemicals, I might add. But it's one of the most misunderstood subjects, in my view, the whole thing about shale and frack. I mean, shale is just merely it's a substrate, it's a bit of rock in which you find hydrocarbons. But because it's a bit like Welsh slate, it's quite difficult to get the hydrocarbons out. So, you fracture it a bit with pressurized water. But we do that with all types of rock that you find hydrocarbons in. So all of the North Sea, you frack the sandstone, you frack all sorts of things. So really what you're talking about is onshore oil and gas. Do you want onshore oil and gas? And we spent about 5 or 6 years doing sort of geological work, really, in the UK, drilling pilot wells and all that sort of stuff. And there's clearly an awful lot of hydrocarbons below the UK on land. A lot, like there is in the United States. And they have many similarities to some of the US shales, where they've been very successful, obviously, in the US. So there's lots of hydrocarbons down there, and it's accessible. But obviously, Vivienne Westwood decided that we should stop. So we stopped.
What do you make now of the environmental objections to shale and the effect that could have on the planning process for shale projects?
I don't really know what the environmental. I mean, it's just onshore oil. It's just onshore drilling, really. I mean, America has drilled 1 million wells. It's the biggest oil and gas producer in the world. They don't have issues. I don't really understand what all the issues are about. I mean, they set the limits on earth tremors at a silly level in the UK because it's a logarithmic scale. So, they set the limit about 300 times lower than quarrying limits. So if you're a quarry, you could do a lot more than you could if you were in shale. And it was about the same level as a truck driving past the front door. Well, that's silly, really.
Well, when you started your career, or at least when you started your career as somebody who bought business assets, we were also at a time of some economic uncertainty. It was the early 90s, I think, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about your background at that time. Where had you come from and what were your aspirations then?
Well, I was 40. It was sort of a turning point when I sort of stepped out into the void, really, in a way. And I put all my assets at risk with a venture capital firm. But my background before that, I was just an industrialist, if you like. I worked for Cortels and Exxon as a chemical engineer. And then I also qualified. I went to London Business School. I did an MBA. In fact, there's somebody around here who used to teach me, Andrew Lickerman here, who was you tried to teach me finance and accounting, I think, Andrew, didn't you? Despairingly. And then became principal for many, many years of London Business School. So I did my MBA, which I enjoyed, really, because before that, when I worked for Beecham Pharmaceuticals before that, I had 2 weeks holiday a year. No, sorry, Exxon. I had 2 weeks holiday a year, and then suddenly I went to London Business School, and I had 22 weeks holiday a year, so that was
an improvement.
For 2 years.
Well, I read in your book that I think your first job was with BP, is that right?
Yeah,
and you were fired after 3 days.
3 days, yeah.
And You went to
It wasn't
Birmingham,
an auspicious beginning.
Birmingham University. They actually posted people's entry percentages, and I think you were
Yes, no, that's
somewhat
right.
to the bottom of that
I was
table.
at the bottom. Yeah. I looked for my name alphabetically, and it wasn't alphabetical. It was right at the bottom of the list. But
Yeah.
I think it was in order of A-level grades, actually. But I'd been to a very old school. They didn't really have teachers there.
Yeah. This was Beverley Grammar
Beverley
School?
Grammar School, yeah.
Yeah.
It was the third oldest school in the country. And I think I mentioned to you earlier, actually, the first head boy, Cuthbert of York, 608.
Right. Yeah, it's quite a record.
Some of the teachers dated back from that.
Yeah. Oh, and what was your upbringing like? What were your parents like? You grew up in Failsworth, Manchester,
Yeah,
I think.
until I was about 10, then I went across to Yorkshire. I always thought of that as missionary work in Yorkshire, really, when I went across there. So I went to Beverley Grammar School, and then I went off to university. So just normal stuff, really. You know, you finished university, and the following week you started work. It was that sort of thing. You didn't take a gap year, or you didn't take the summer off, or anything like that, really. And you know, I mean, for me, your memories are not negative in any way. But I lived on, you know, a council estate in Manchester. It was very civilised. It was very clean and tidy, and very, you know, a very nice place to live. It's maybe a bit different today. But.
Do you think you would have built this huge industrial empire if you hadn't worked at Advent, if you hadn't got your hands, as it were, on the levers of debt, equity, financing?
It was about acquisitions, really,
yeah.
Yes. I think, I mean, I moved there when I was about 35, so I was with Advent for about 5 years. It was a very different type of world to working for an Exxon or a Courtaulds, which is, you know, sort of much more of a 9 to 5 industrial sort of job. I mean, I remember when I arrived at Advent, they gave me a desk, and that was it. They said, go out and invest money. I said, well, yeah, but
sink or swim.
And I remember the first conversation I had with lawyers when I found a deal to do, which was awful. It was an appalling deal. Never have done it. But I remember the first conversation with the lawyers when they started talking about warranties and indemnities. And I've never heard of those. What are those?
Did you bluff your way at that point, or did you admit that this was a technicality you weren't familiar with?
No, there's probably a bit of bullshit there, probably somewhere along the line. But I mean, over 5 years, the thing about venture capital, it's a wonderful learning experience because you're very focused on how you make money, because you have to invest £1 and you've got to make £2 out of £1, you know. So you're very, very focused on that. You get paid extremely well. I remember I left Courtaulds to join Advent, and the car they gave me was better than the chairman of Courtaulds' car. So that was I remember it was a BMW 535i, which I was very proud of. But you got paid really well, but you got fired really easily. You know, so if you did bad deals, you got fired, and if you didn't do deals, you got fired.
But you recovered from your first bad deal.
Yeah, I sort of wormed my way through the system, and then eventually I got better at it as I learnt the process a bit. Really, it was full of Harvard MBAs and people like that, you know, and it was an American organisation, so it was quite a sharp learning curve, and it wasn't something I ever truly, and I appreciated it and learned a lot. But I didn't ever really enjoy it because once you got your head around a business, you'd actually done a deal and you bought a business, you then have to walk away from it and you do the next deal, you know. Whereas I'm much more interested in buying the business and then.
Well, that takes us on
really.
to buying businesses and holding them and managing them. And which do you think was the most important back in the 90s? Inspec was the first one, and then you bought, I think, the Antwerp site of Inspec, and that is what really became INEOS. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So we started in '92, which is when we bought BP Fine Chemicals, and we bought that in September, the end of September in '92, and in September, I think something like the 22nd of '92 was when Norman Lamont lost control of the economy and the banking system. And so I'd worked for about 1.5 years on that deal, and on something like September the 22nd, it was all off. The Bank of Scotland rang up and said, the interest rate's just gone up to 26%, you can't afford it, so the deal's off after 1.5 years. So, but then a couple of days later, obviously, well, you know, we pulled out the ERM and the interest rates fell again and the deal was back on. So, so that was absolutely the pivotal point in my business life, was that day. I remember my colleague, there were two of us, my colleague was a chap called John Hollywood. He caught the afternoon plane when Bank of Scotland rang up in the morning, he caught the afternoon plane to Barbados. I go and lie on a beach and recover. And I had to ring him up the following day and tell him to get back on the plane as the deal was back on again. And it got done at the end of the week.
Yes, yes.
But we bought that business for £37 million. And then we went public 15 months later. And we bought one business for $11 million. And we went public for £150 million 15 months later. So we quadrupled our money in 15 months, really. And Advent were delighted. But bear in mind, at that time, I was an officer of Advent, and I hopped over the fence to become the chief executive. I mean, they were very nice about it, but they still wanted me to mortgage my life and family and what have you, you know. So I had to put everything on the table. But it was very unusual for people to hop out of venture capital into business. But it was a fantastic learning experience for me, that 5 years, yeah.
And when you bought Innovine in 2005,
Yep.
in retrospect, was it a little bit too big given what happened after that in terms of debt markets and so forth?
Oh, no.
No?
No. I think it was absolutely transformational for us because it was quite ballsy at the time, I have to say. I was quite surprised the banks followed through with it, which they did. But we were 8 billion euros of sales, and the BP business was about 23, 24 billion. So it's about 3 times our size. So we quadrupled in size overnight. We didn't visit a site, and we didn't meet a manager. And
Wow.
Yeah. So due diligence was limited. But we knew BP very well. They're very honest, very straightforward. We knew the assets really well. So we did all our due diligence, but it was all at a distance. I mean, the refineries we struggled a bit with because we didn't really know much about refining. We've got a chap called Jim Dawson here from Shale, who's our wise old man in. He doesn't like the old bit, but he is quite getting on a bit. Our wise old man in INEOS. And we were struggling a bit with getting our heads around refining because it's quite complex refining. It's very different to petrochemicals. And he sent us a link to a site called How Stuff Works. And that was my first education in refining, where we were just about to spend $9 billion on this very large acquisition at the time. Yeah. But that turned into a
What were big companies like BP missing? Because you think about that complete breakdown of the chemicals business, you know, this huge chemicals industry which was controlled by businesses like BP and ICI, which was really essentially all of those businesses were spun off over a period of about 20 years. What didn't they see? Or was it simply they were the wrong kind of owners?
I think it's sort of slightly different to that. I think BP were, you know, the officers at BP were really, really good at oil and gas. But they weren't necessarily really good at petrochemicals because they're, you know, the way, and we've got Brian here, who was the CFO for BP a long time, he works for but the way to the top of BP was through the oil and gas organisation, not through chemicals. So the whole focus of that organisation was oil and gas, and the margins in oil and gas are phenomenal. So, and your fixed costs are relatively small relative to the scale of the business, whereas so petrochemicals got different, you know, fixed costs are very important in petrochemicals if you want to run it well and successfully. So it really wasn't the focus of their attention. If they were focused on it, I'm sure they would have done it very well, but they weren't focused on it. Whereas when we came, you know, having just spent $9 billion, we were more than focused on it.
I would imagine you were, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, just tell us a little bit about how INEOS operates. What's the ownership and the management philosophy? You're sort of somewhat decentralized, I think.
I think one of the things that's quite special about INEOS, which you see occasionally but not very often, and it stems back from my venture capital days, is it's a very federal structure. So we don't really have a head office of any consequence. It's you know, we have a series of businesses, probably 25 now, and they're very independently managed. You know, they have full accountability, full responsibility, the management teams. They have a board, and they meet with Andy and myself and John once a month, and they have a board meeting, and it's a proper board meeting, but they have full control of their business. They don't have head office people telling them how to do this, how to do that. So they sort of know where to hide. It's the opposite of, you know, if you finish up with a large head office and business units, you finish up with this matrix structure, which is quite amorphous. People can hide. sometimes responsibilities are unclear. And INEOS is absolutely the opposite of that. We've got direct lines, quite short levels of communication, so we can move quite quickly. And also, it's the model which can grow quite quickly, because you've got 25 different businesses. They all become slightly entrepreneurial because we are slightly entrepreneurial, and they see that and they learn from that. And they're independent, so they can get going quite quickly if they come up with, and they're always coming up with, unfortunately, they're always coming up with ideas which, it's quite demanding sometimes when you're sat
How
at the
do you
top of it.
decide which ones to back?
Well, we backed one this morning, actually, believe it or not.
What was that?
Well, I can't tell you what it was.
Oh, come on, just between ourselves.
No. I don't trust you enough, Jonathan. Well, I don't trust these cameras anyway. But that was a roughly $5 billion transaction, which we so we tend to deal with, they're quite big things these days. We would never, it's just a matter of noughts, really. At the end of the day, you're just as focused on something that's 5 billion as you are on 50 million when you're a bit smaller. So life hasn't changed. It's just the noughts that's changed, really. But one of the key words in INEOS, we have these 3 key words. It's part of our DNA, really: grit, rigor, and humour. But the word I most like in INEOS is rigor. And you need to be rigorous.
You set hurdles,
analysis.
IRR hurdles, that kind of thing, or?
Well, just in terms of understanding your business really thoroughly before. I mean, bear in mind that when you work for an organisation like Advent in venture capital, they're in the business of making acquisitions. We've invested huge amounts of money in deals, but 80% of deals go wrong. 80%.
How do you change those odds? Because that's certain.
Rigor.
There is certainly a view that that's
Just
the
rigor.
case.
Well, it's 2 things really. One is rigor. You have to do your homework really well, really properly, and you have to be able to walk away if the price is the wrong price, really. And the other lesson from the world of venture capital was just a simple one, really, that the more deals you look at, the better deals you do.
And given the trends in asset prices, how do you like them at the moment?
Well, it's asset prices are cyclical, really.
They're dropping.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously you like prices that are low rather than high. But when the prices are low, it's normally when life's a bit tougher economically and it's more difficult to raise the finance. So the banking world's not functioning quite as well. So, it just depends on the circumstances at the time. Obviously, you'd rather pay less than more, but sometimes you can't because, you can't finance it or the business isn't in a position it can do it. But investing at the bottom of the cycle is always something we have liked doing. Yeah.
Are we there yet? The bottom of the cycle?
No. I think it's coming.
When will we know?
It's interesting. We sell very fundamental materials. We sell whatever 50 or 70 million tons of chemicals. Well, they're very fundamental because they are in everything that we touch and use. So we see a fall in demand very early. In the downstream industries, it's a bit later. And August was a really dramatic month in our order books across the world. Apart from America wasn't too bad, but the rest of the world was, and September worse. It's not going to be in the same league as 2008, but it's exactly the same timing as 2008 because, I know the lights went out in January, if you remember, at the beginning of 2009, but the early collapse was August. That's when we saw the order books diving.
Right.
And then I think September, Lehman Brothers went down, didn't they, and all that sort of stuff. So we're not in that position, but yeah, the order books definitely are in a sorry state at the moment in August, September, October, yeah, which is just, industry struggling downstream.
Yes, yeah. What do you think the outlook is for industry in Western Europe? It's going to be very hard, particularly in places like Germany, right?
Yeah.
They're going to be rationed. They're going to have cut capacity heavily.
I think you shouldn't, Europe has not been particularly buoyant for quite some time, really, but one shouldn't underestimate the impact of energy prices. I think, if you look back over history, energy's always been quite important in economic growth. The Industrial Revolution is when we found coal, and America, exploded about 150 years ago on the back of coal and oil and gas and things like that. So, Europe is in a mess energy-wise. The prices of energy here now are multiples of the United States. So, we're 5 to 10 times higher in electricity and gas prices here in Europe than in the United States. The United States is in a fantastic place because they invested in nuclear and they invested in gas. And so, just to give you an example with gas, the units don't really matter, but 2 summers ago, the price of gas in the UK was 15 pence a therm, 15, in the summer. And a few months ago, it was 500 pence a therm. You can't, you can't run businesses.
Yeah, it's come down a little since then, but
yeah, it's come down a little, and we've now got the energy cap, which helps. But bear in mind the energy cap, the price of electricity was typically about £50 a megawatt hour. The energy cap's 200. So the energy cap is at 4 times the energy prices we're used to.
Yeah.
And the energy price I've got on a long-term contract in France, which is a nuclear deal, is about 40 euros a megawatt hour. So, we've got a cap of 200, but let's not,
Sure.
they're nowhere near that in the United
Do you think
States.
it's enough, given the fragility of industry?
Well, it's a damn sight better than paying market price. Before that, for Grangemouth alone, which actually in INEOS is a very small business now, the cheque we had to write before Liz Truss's government came up with the tool was £100 million between now and Christmas to keep them alive. 100 million quid. It's not a small cheque for Grangemouth. And bear in mind, Grangemouth has never made a penny. The cheque is now smaller than that, but it's still a cheque.
Yeah.
And all our businesses in America are making money.
Do you think there are going to be bankruptcies?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
And just tell us a little...
And closure,
Right.
shutdowns and things.
Shutdowns.
I don't even remember in 2008, all manufacturing shut down over Christmas, and it didn't open up again until February.
I recall. Just
Lights went out.
tell us a little bit about what it was like at INEOS at that time, because into 2009 it was quite tough, I think. Banks were very, very nervous. There was a lot of disruption in the financial markets, a lot of people trying to impose extra conditions on their borrowers.
We made an error in our banking. We made an error, and I don't think it's an excusable error. And this involves a couple of numbers if people can cope with this. But if your stock's reduce in value, then the reduction in the stock value you take to your profit and loss account as a cost. Yeah. So we had 2 refineries, and in those refineries, we had 10 million barrels of oil, just keeping them wet, because they have to... So when you start a refinery, you can't start it with nothing in it. You put 5 million barrels of oil in it, and it's circulating around, So the oil is in there from day one till the day it closes, a bit like the steel in the refinery. So in 2008, in the summer, the price of oil was $130, and at Christmas it was 30. So it reduced by $100, and we had 10 million barrels of oil in our refinery. So the reduction in the value of the oil in our refineries was $1 billion. Have you got that? Because it reduced by $100, 10 million barrels. But that's not cash, it's just stuff that's sitting there. It's like steel. There's probably steel in the refineries reduced by 5 million, but you have to take that to your P&L account. And that breached covenant in INEOS's banking agreements. And that then basically, because all the banks were so stressed, because they were in such difficulties, that opened the doors to the vault. Because we breached the covenant, that gives the banks a nail.
Did you ever think you might lose the business?
Yeah, it was quite touch and go for a while. The banks took probably about 700 million out of INEOS, out of the vault. INEOS's cash flow was fine. But the fact that we had this technical breach of a banking covenant, it would never happen today because we wouldn't sign a banking agreement with that covenant in, but that January, February, March was extremely stressful because there wasn't any light at the end of the tunnel, if you remember, in January, February, March, and then life started to get a bit clearer. And honestly, the banks, what are the banks going to do with a petrochemical business, which is difficult to manage? It's a not dangerous business. It's a business which has got a lot of hazard and risk in it, and you have to manage it well. So at the end of the day, we struck a deal with the banks, and we've never looked back since, really.
Tell us a little bit about Grangemouth, because you said it never makes a penny. You had a confrontation with the unions there in 2013. The Guardian, which is hardly an anti-union newspaper, described this as a rout for Unite. It was all mixed up with local Scottish politics. What happened there, and are you afraid of a repeat performance? I think there's a lot of pressure on wage costs at the moment in industry.
I mean, just briefly what happened back in, I can't remember which year it was now, it's about 10 years ago, was Grangemouth, the raw materials for chemicals are oil and gas, fundamentally. So Grangemouth was a processing unit for the gas that came from the North Sea, and it produced chemicals from that gas. But the gas that was coming from the North Sea was getting to a point where it was inadequate to supply the needs of Grangemouth. And so Grangemouth went into loss because it didn't have enough raw material. And the only way to resolve the situation was to bring the raw material across from America, which was the shale gas, right? Which is what we now do. We bring the shale gas across from the United States to feed that, what was called a gas cracker. But the investment required was 300 million. And the wage costs were too high at Grangemouth. So the wage costs in Grangemouth were, a typical operator would earn £50,000 a year, and his pension costs were 65% of his salary. So, I mean, they just were fundamentally too expensive. The thing was in loss. So we said to people that if you're prepared to reduce your pension to a 15% contribution, which is a reasonably generous pension in the UK, and freeze your salaries for 3 years, we will invest the 300 million, and then there should be a bright future for Grangemouth. And the unions campaigned against that. They said no, and that's why we finished up with a showdown with the unions. So we said that unless the employees, ourselves, and the government were going to provide a loan guarantee, we're prepared to chip in, then the thing had lost 600 million over the previous couple of years. I'm afraid we'd have to close it down. So that's what that altercation with the unions was all about. But I think the observation I have about unions, which my father was always a member of unions, so I'm not anti-union in any way, and most of our businesses in Europe are unionised in some form or another, in America not. But I think the contrast, for me, that's most interesting, if I talk to a German union and I talk to a British union, and I'm generalising, but it's broadly accurate, if I talk to a German union, their interest is tomorrow. All the conversations with the German union is about why are you not investing more in this facility? Because we want jobs here for our workers' children and our workers' children's children. And the first time when we bought a very large facility in Germany, which is in Cologne, which we bought from BP, 2,000 or 3,000 people, that's the size of the city of London. And I met the union convener, was a big German chap called Siggy, and we talked about football and stuff like that to start with, had a cup of tea. And then he turned to me and he said, Jim, I don't like your bonus policy, because this is about 3 months in. And I said, well, why don't you like my bonus? I said, it's generous, and not only is it generous, it doesn't just apply to management, it applies all the way through. All the operators get a bonus. He said, I don't care, I want you to invest the money in the plant and invest in the future, because I want jobs here for the children, the workers' children, the workers' children's children. I'll never forget it. Whereas if you're in the UK, the debate with the unions is all about, I want more money, I want more holidays, I want more pension, I don't like job versatility, all that sort of thing.
Are you worried that's going to happen again for you in the UK? Are you worried that's going to happen for you again in the UK?
Well, what you finish up is it's a disincentive to investment, because if you want manufacturing to succeed in the UK and you want to create manufacturing jobs and increase that percentage of our GDP, which is dismal now, is you need investment. You need people like me to come and invest and build things in the UK and employ people in the manufacturing sector. And it's tough if you've got that sort of relationship with it. I mean, you want the union should be out there campaigning for lower energy costs, and they should be campaigning for shale, because that would create investment in the north of England, which is, the north of England is a manufacturing economy, isn't it? That's where it started, and manufacturing's disappeared in the. I mean, it's one of my hobby horses, really, but if you look at manufacturing in the UK in 1990, it was the same level as Germany, which was about 25%. If you look at Germany today, it's still about the same level. 25% of its economy is money. So manufacturing is really strong in Germany. It's got all these companies, Siemens, Bosch, Mercedes, Porsche, da-da-da-da. And if you look at the UK was 25%, but the UK today is 8%. And there's nothing left of manufacturing in the UK because nobody wants to invest in the UK. The government are not interested. We've got unions who are difficult. Energy is expensive. Our education and our apprenticeship schemes are not what they were. We used to have polytechnics and technical colleges. We used to train people really well. If you go back 30 or 40 years, the UK was in a great place, but it's not today, I'm afraid. And that, I'm from the north of England, It's a manufacturing economy in the north of England, and the north of England is not in a great place today, as a consequence. So.
And did government policy on support for industry affect your decision to move the tax base? Because I think INEOS moved its tax base to Switzerland in 2010. You, I think, are tax resident in Monaco. Could you tell us why you've done that and what might bring you back?
I used to know Jeremy Hayward really well, who's the cabinet secretary, who was he became quite a good friend of mine, and I used to spend a lot of time. And he was always extremely encouraging of us being based in the UK, because we are British at the end of the day. But in the 2008 meltdown, when cash wasn't, the lights went out in January. When nobody knew what was going to happen, and we asked the government, it was Gordon Brown at the time, I think, and the Treasury, whether we could delay one VAT payment for 12 months. And one VAT payment for INEOS in the UK at the time was about £350 million. Bear in mind, they put £60 billion into the banking community, and we were one of the top 3 or 4 largest manufacturing enterprises in the UK. I mean, today, the largest manufacturing enterprise in the UK. And the answer was no, we can't do that. So we lost a little bit of our UK commitment from that, to be honest, because it wasn't a difficult, it was all too difficult, and we sort of, we've got a big facility in Liverpool, we've got a big facility in Scotland, we had a big facility in the northeast. I mean, we employ 5,000 people. If you take all the add-ons, probably 40,000 people. But 60 billion into banking, and you can't delay one VAT. Anyway, frankly, bluntly, we were pretty pissed off at that, to be honest. And we were in a mode where we were looking at anything we could do to help the plight of INEOS in these difficult times, and moving to Switzerland with their lower tax base. So they had a corporate tax rate which was much, much lower than the UK, probably had a value of about 400 million. So we decided to do it. I mean, at the end of the day, it's your life's work,
And your personal move to Monaco, why did you decide to do that?
What you mean, other than the sunshine? I get a lot of jip about this, and I don't feel hair-shirted or guilty about it at all, but I moved to Monaco when I was 65. Half the planet moves to the Costa del Sol when they're 60, don't they? I mean, 60, I'm in retirement.
Okay.
I've moved to the sunshine.
That's a good riposte.
I will say that we have, the assets in the UK are 13 billion. We employ 5,000, probably in total 40,000 people. And our value added in the UK is probably about 3 billion. And we contribute to a lot of tax. And I spent my working life in the UK paying tax. Now I happen to like living in a Californian climate and being able to get on my bicycle and cycle up a hill without being run over,
Very good. Yeah. Well, look, I have lots more questions. I'm afraid we didn't get onto this, but it's time. You've heard enough from me. It's time for your questions from the floor and also online. So please register any questions you have. I hope there are some already, using the Slido app and the passwords to Jim. Meanwhile, I think we have some microphones scattered around the room. Would any of you like to ask Sir Jim a question now? Have gentleman there and also someone behind also, I think. If you could just give us your name as well, and if you're from an organisation, which one?
So, question to Sir Jim. My name's Nima, and I've just graduated from a degree in chemical engineering at the University of Edinburgh. And I guess my question was, what advice do you have to a young graduate who's starting out their career, and what was the biggest lesson that you learned from the early part of your career?
Oh, I think you've got to find something you like to do. You spend a lot of your life working, so you need to do something that you enjoy, and then you need to do it well. Really, I think you need to you need to show commitment, do it well, do your best, and then you follow a path, and your paths will open for you. If you do a good job and you do well, then doors open. That's what happened with me.
And someone there as well.
Don't work at home.
That was probably the most controversial thing you will hear. No, really, in a lot of workplaces. Yeah. I'm looking at these front rows with INEOS people in here. Sort of some of them are shifting guiltily. Please, what's your name, sir?
Hi, my name is Abdallah. I'm from the United Arab Emirates. I'm the president of Emirates Trade Investment. So, Jim, thank you very much for the opportunity. You talk about energy crisis. You talk about sunshine. We have sunshine in the Emirates. We don't have an energy crisis. I'm wondering if you do any business there, if you have any interest to develop your businesses there.
Well, I think how long ago? Probably in July, I met Khaldoon Mubarak, who I'm sure you'll know, who is sort of effectively the owner of Manchester City, and he's got about $3 billion of investments around the world, and he's got a few chemical investments. So I went to talk to him about chemical investments, and we were together I went over there to Abu Dhabi, and we were there for about 2.5 hours to talk about chemical things, and after about 2 hours and 15 minutes, we got onto the subject of chemicals. So you can probably imagine what we were talking about. But anyway, so we decided there probably wasn't anything to be done on chemicals, and he gave me a few illuminating stories about his football, which has been very successful for him, really, to be honest.
Good. Do we have anybody else? I think gentleman here at the front, and then somebody on the right-hand side, and then we have a couple of people at the back.
Me? My turn?
Yes, please. What's your name, sir?
So, Jim, Tim Dyer, Feltimo. Can you tell me a little bit about INEOS in China?
INEOS in China, yeah. Well, I don't know how well known. I think we've made it public, but we've just signed a very large deal in China with Sinopec, which probably in its entirety would probably have sales of getting on for $20 billion. So it's a really serious commitment to China, where I'm afraid whether we like it or not, China is definitely one of the two major superpowers, and they are seriously good in our field, which is making chemicals. And I think, we're very much a global enterprise. So, whereas 60% of our assets are in Europe, 40% are in America, historically. America has always made far more profits than Europe. But we're now looking at major projects in the Middle East, and we already have a number of assets in Asia, but this would be transformational in Asia and China for us, because it would be a seriously big business for INEOS. And it would certainly make INEOS the biggest chemical business in the world, because we're probably number 3 at the moment, and if we do that, if that completes, which it will do, probably be the biggest in the world then. So it's quite a serious transaction for us. Yeah. So I better start learning my Mandarin. Yeah.
Gentleman here on this side.
I remember. Can I just tell you?
Yeah.
I remember once we had dinner with the chairman of PetroChina, Mr. Zhang, his name was, and we were drinking Mai Tai that was some horrendous price per bottle, and he asked me how things were getting along, because we have a joint venture with PetroChina. We have 2 refineries, and I said, I have to say, that they're very nice people to work with, and they are, actually. The Chinese people are very nice people to work with. They're very intelligent, and they're very gentlemanly. But I said that sometimes the progress with them can be glacial, which of course it is, because you're talking to an enterprise, and then the enterprise has to talk to the government before it can ever make a decision. So I said, but you know, the progress is, you know, it can be glacial. And he said, oh, that quick? It's my Chinese story. Anyway, sorry.
Gentleman there.
Hello,
Hello.
Sir Jim. José Souroujo from Mexico. I'm curious, what do you do in the mornings when you get up to be so full of energy the whole day?
Well, this morning I went to Café Colbert, and I started my day with a cup of coffee in Café Colbert and read the newspaper. But I think for me, you know, my release, you know, everybody has their different ways of sort of relaxing and coping with stress and all that sort of thing, is I have to have an hour a day. I'm quite, not neurotic's too strong, but or obsessive, they're too strong, but I'm quite disciplined about it. So I have my hour a day of exercise. So at lunchtime, I run around Hyde Park, you know, and then I can think about all these difficult questions Jonathan's going to ask me, you know, while I'm jogging around the park. And, but that's you know, that's sort of, you know, my thing, really.
Great. And over here?
Hello, yes. Nigel Davis from ICIS. How do you see the future of the petrochemical industry in Europe over the next 5 or 10 years? I mean, can it meet the sustainability challenge, do you believe?
I mean, there's two questions there. One's about sustainability and one's about Europe. I think Europe's going to increasingly find it tough because energy is expensive, but also because, you know, European governments are very heavy on carbon footprint and are taxing the carbon footprint of the European chemical industry, whereas the rest of the world are not doing that. And of course, so if you've got industry that's A, it's uncompetitive, but B, it's being taxed in a way that its competitors are not being taxed, then what it will do is it will basically offshore manufacturing from Europe. I mean, we're trying to build a new cracker in Antwerp at the moment at a cost of about 4 billion euros, and it has been horrendous with the NGOs and whatever sort of pie. I mean, this is the only cracker on the planet that could potentially have a zero carbon footprint. And, you know, you need renewal in industry, like you do with the car industry. You know, a new car has got far less carbon footprint than an old car. You know, it's much less polluting, so you need that. But Europe, unfortunately, in a sense, disincentivizes it because they penalize the carbon footprint. And so that was one half. What was the other half of the question? Sustainability.
Yeah.
I think, you know, sustainability is all about how do you reduce the impact we have on the planet? And that's absolutely the right thing to do. And there are lots of things that we can do to reduce the impact that we have on the planet. And, you know, part of that is about the carbon footprint, part of it is about recycling, and part of it is about what we can do to improve the efficiencies of, you know, people downstream, like in Mexico, for instance, you know, plastic water pipes, so, you know, which don't leak, which is a sort of big project in Mexico City at the moment. But if you look at the carbon footprint of INEOS, we've said we'll reduce our carbon footprint by 33% by 2030, which we will do. But to reduce our carbon footprint by 1 ton of CO2 per year costs us 1 million euros of investment. So it's not cheap. So for us to do that between now and 2030 is 8 billion euros of investment. So it's, you know, it's not cheap. So, you know, I can't remember what was the disruption is one of the, I mean, that's one of the disruptors in chemicals at the moment is the amount of capital requirement to you know, to reach the level of sustainability that people are talking about is really huge. And, you know, but we need to remain profitable because we're not sustainable if we're not profitable. You know, there's no point all the businesses in Europe going bust, you know. Anyway, slightly waffly answer.
Great. Well, look, I'm going to take a few questions from the audience online. We've got those coming in at quite a good rate, and please do send more. And a couple that seem to be linked, one of which is, are there any new businesses you would like to enter? And what is your vision for the future of INEOS Automotive? This is a chance to tell us a little bit about the Grenadier, which I think starts production this week.
Yes, correct. Starts. Yeah, the first one should have come off the line next week. Yeah, I think it comes back to this word rigor a bit. We understand the chemicals, petrochemicals well, obviously, because we've been in that for 30 years. But the learning curve in oil and gas, which Brian here, who's CFO of BP, has been in all his life, we're now in oil and gas and in an increasing way, but there's a lot to learn in oil and gas. And then you've got automotive again, and I know Ola very well, who runs Mercedes, who's been steeped in it for all his life, like Brian's been steeped in oil and gas. And there's an immense amount to learn there. So the answer to the first question, do I want to go anywhere? We've also got fashion company, which is just beyond me, really. But no, I think I can't cope with any more. And also we've got sport, and we're trying to get our heads around how to run a football club and things like that, which is equally challenging. But automotive...
how's that looking?
I think is looking really good, I have to say. I think it's a really... No, well, I wouldn't I? But, it's a really good... This is a really good... It's almost unique, I think, really. It's fantastic off-road. It's unbreakable. I drove in it 2 weeks ago with Lewis Hamilton on a road circuit, and he drove it like he stole it. And it's remarkably good on road, and remarkably comfortable on road as well. But it's a G-Wagon, but it's a third the price of a G-Wagon. It's fantastic. It's going to be built by the same people who build a G-Wagon. It was engineered by the people who build a G-Wagon, which is Magna in Austria, who are a huge company, but they don't have a customer-facing side. So it's a bit of British design and German engineering, German, Austrian, that sort of same, really, engineering. And I think it's going to be really successful. So.
Going to make a profit from that business, do you think?
Better do.
Are you a tough boss?
No, I'm a really nice boss. Yeah, well, we put a lot of money into it, so it's quite a serious project. So, we're talking about a car company which will produce relatively high volume. So we're not talking about a car company that will produce 1,000 cars a year. This is, 25, 50, 75,000 cars a year, and we'll produce an electric car in 2025. So, apart from Tesla, but that's sort of a new product almost. Apart from Tesla, there hasn't been a new car company for generations, really. They're all the old names, aren't they? Ford, BMW, Porsche, etc. So it's quite new in the world, really, a new volume car producer, other than obviously the likes of the Chinese, but they don't really come out of China. So, but I think it's a fantastic car. I've driven it all over the place. I've driven it along the Skeleton Coast in Namibia. I've tried to kill it in Iceland. I've been all over the place. Lewis tried to break it in the UK. So it's really good.
Interesting.
The only time it was quite interesting with Lewis, actually. He was very comfortable with it, and he did things with it which I couldn't believe on the road. But as soon as we got off-road, he started to get a little bit nervous. Which
comfort zone.
Yeah, I've never seen Lewis looking nervous in a car before, so that was quite nice. I quite enjoyed that. Yeah.
There are quite a few questions coming in from the online audience which are about sustainability in general. And, for example, asking, what is your vision in terms of ESG? How comfortable are you with that piece of terminology, and how useful do you think it is for INEOS?
Well, it's just this whole general question of sustainability. Generally sustainability, which is carbon footprint and recycling and...
but then there's a sort of social and governance and all of that sort of thing as well?
Well, we have our sort of core values, which I think are, we're an honest, straightforward company. We do things properly and we do things well. Andy, myself and John, we're all from the same sort of neck of the woods. We've got the same values. We were brought up with those sort of proper values, really, and I think that's how we run INEOS. That's not going to change. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. We don't do brown envelopes, if that's what you're saying. We don't do that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
We don't break rules.
Stuart McFarlane asks, rather more specific question, rather more granular. Could you please talk about your plans in LNG, in particular your deal with Sempra and access to European gas markets?
Oh, no. I mean, nobody's going to find that interesting.
Well, LNG.
Good heavens.
I'll ask you about football in a moment, but
Yeah.
LNG is interesting.
No,
right?
LNG is interesting because, I mean, I don't know whether people sort of recognise the change in the gas markets in the world, but if you look 20 years ago, oil was transportable, so you could ship oil around the world. Nobody uses oil. You have to put it through a refinery to turn it into petrol and diesel and aviation fuels, all that sort of heating fuels or bunker fuels for ships, all that type of stuff. So, but oil had a global price because it was more expensive in one place than another. You just put it in a ship and ship it across, you know. So, you know, it always arbitraged out to the same price, oil. But gas, you could only transport in pipes. So it was a local gas market. So it was all a function of supply and demand in a particular market. So if you've got lots of gas and, you know, so if America had lots and lots of gas and it's, you know, more gas than it needed, the price was relatively low. It was a margin over, you know, your investment costs and all that sort of thing. But if you didn't have much gas, then the gas prices were quite high. The UK, gas prices for a while were quite good because we've got lots of gas coming out of the North Sea. But the new technology that's transformed all of that is LNG, which is liquefied natural gas, which has not been around for very long, which is you liquefy the gas and then it reduces in volume by about 1,000. So instead of 1,000 ships of gas, you've got one ship of liquid. Okay, so you can then ship gas around like you can ship oil around, but you have to take it down to minus 200 degrees centigrade. So it's technically challenging, and building LNG terminals is very expensive because minus 200 degrees centigrade is only 73 degrees off absolute zero, you know, which is 0 Kelvin. So you can now ship tankers of LNG into the UK, and there are some very big gas, you know, there's some off the north coast of Australia, there's some off Mozambique, there's, you know, the big gas field off Qatar. They've all built LNG terminals, and of course America has built quite a lot of LNG terminals so they can export it. So we can now bring LNG into the UK, which solves part of our problem with North Sea dying. But you've got to bid it away from Asia, and Asia uses a lot of that LNG. So we have committed to contractually to taking LNG out of America and bring it across to Europe.
Yeah.
So we have, and you know that commitment is in the billions, many billions. So we will become an LNG supplier to Europe, bringing it across from the United States, where, you know, they very successfully exploited their shale reserves, which we have got masses of down below, but we haven't exploited.
This is not an online question from from this iPad, but rather from a lot of posts on social media, where there is a substantial fan base for Manchester United who say they'd rather like the idea of you trying to buy Manchester United because they think you would run it differently. Firstly, do you think you might? Is there a chance of that? And secondly, would you run it?
Might I run it differently, or might I run it?
Might you run it differently? I'm sure you'd run it.
I think the answer about performance on Manchester United is a simple one, really, that the biggest correlation in success in football is money, without question. It's not the only correlation, because you've got outliers like Brighton. Okay, but the biggest correlation by far is if you've got the highest revenues, you can afford the best players, you play the best football. Yeah? And Manchester United is one of those, it was one of those top three clubs. You had the two in Spain, Madrid and Barca, and you had Manchester United, and the all-in revenues about 800 million. There's a few more have joined that club now, of course, because you've got Bayern Munich, you've got PSG, you've got, I can hardly say it, Manchester City. And you know, Liverpool are a little bit closer, but Manchester United are not playing in that league. They're not playing in the league of those other teams at the moment, and they haven't done for quite some years now, really, since Sir Alex stepped down. So something is not, you know, they're not firing on all cylinders. So I think that would be my point on performance, really, And
would you like to come back for another? Do you think there's a possibility you might acquire it at some point?
Well, I think I mean, I'm a lifelong Manchester United fan, and I was there in '99, that most remarkable match in '99 when in Barcelona. So you know, that's sort of deeply etched in my mind. But Manchester United is owned by the Glazer family, whom I have met. I've met Joel and Avram, and they are the nicest people, I have to say. They're proper gentlemen, they're really nice people, and they don't want to sell it. And it's owned by the 6 children of the father, and they don't want to sell it. So if it had been for sale in the summer, yes, we would probably have had a go following on from the Chelsea thing. But we can't sit around hoping that one day Manchester United will become available. So I think what will happen now is we have a sports franchise, which is a really interesting franchise. I mean, you know, we own a third of the Mercedes Formula One team, which is, you know, has been the most successful in the last few years. Robbed last year, obviously. But, you know, we've got a great cycling team. Eliud Kipchoge we're quite close to. And probably the most challenging of all is Ben Ainsley with his America's Cup Challenge, which is going quite well at the moment, and that's obviously a couple of years away. But the one thing that we don't have is you know, the most popular sport in the world is football. It's the sport which John, Andy, and myself were brought up with, and it's sort of closest to us. So we should have an asset in the sporting franchise that
A Premiership club.
well, not a Premiership. I think a Premier club.
Okay.
You know, a Premier club. And I think Nice has got a very interesting history. It's an old club. It's in a very nice place, a very attractive place for footballers because it's a Californian climate down there. And you know, if I look at what Manchester City did with Manchester City, what Mubarak did with Manchester, or Mubadala did with Manchester City, what the Qataris did with PSG was just a Lyon or a Marseille, you know, 10 years ago. Then we'll probably have a look at what we might be able to do with Nice. But there you go. That's extremely.
Further questions? Must have some more from the floor. You must have thought of things. Lots and lots. We're gentleman there and then a lady next to him.
I'm coming.
Colleague of mine, in fact.
Hi. James Whelan from Whelan Refining. We've got a small refinery in Stoke, a little bit smaller than yours. You've also got some of the fracking licenses by Stoke, and so obviously that's of interest to our area. And the moratorium's been lifted, and you talked a little bit about it earlier, but there's so many other hurdles now to it that I'm sure will be placed in your way. What do you think are the actual chances of it happening?
Well, I think it should happen, would be my view, because America has proven time and time again that you can do it safely, and it's very safe. And we spent 5 years at it. We spent 250 million, and what we did discover was a lot of stuff down there, but then they pulled the rug out from under our feet. So that was Boris, obviously, after he'd had a coffee with Vivienne Westwood, as far as I can see. Anyway. The scientists in the UK said it was all perfectly fine and it's good technology and everything else, but Vivienne, who was off to the Paris fashion show, I think at the time, didn't like it, so we decided not to do it, which, you know, it's not what the UK government should do, in my view. It should be more scientifically based than that. But, I mean, if you look now, sort of look forward, we're sort of in a difficult position, aren't we? We know that under the South Yorkshire coalfields, there's a lot of hydrocarbons. And it's an area which is used to hydrocarbons because it's the South Yorkshire coalfield. So the employment and the investment in that area would be extremely welcome, I think. And what we have said now for 2 or 3 years with the government is what we think we should do in the UK is do a demonstration site in South Yorkshire of a shale facility. Just one pad, which would be the size of half a football field, will drill 10 wells, because you drill down and then you radiate out. And people can look at that and decide, because there's no point us going down the shale path again if in 3 years' time they pull the rug over. I mean, I'm going to look really stupid if I spend another 250 million and they pull the rug out from under my feet again. You know, I don't want to look stupid, and I don't want to be stupid, really, to be honest. So the UK community needs to decide whether it's a good thing for the UK, and I think the best way to do that would be to do a demonstration facility. We can do that. We're in INEOS is in shale. We have shale wells in the United States anyway, so we can do that perfectly well. We're a big, responsible company that's used to dealing with, you know, hazardous, you know, high pressures and pipes and valves and wells, all that type of stuff. That's what we do for a living. So that would be that's my proposal to government, is we build a demonstration facility somewhere in, I mean, it's obvious where we would do it, and that would probably take us a year, and then people can look at what happens, how it works, were there any earth tremors, were there anything to get worried about, you know, is there any pollution, is it an eyesore? It isn't an eyesore, you've got 10 little pipes sticking out the ground, you know, it's nothing, and in a tiny little garden shed, there's nothing to see.
Have you made that offer directly to them?
Just to be, yes.
You have, and what did they say?
It's quite difficult getting an answer out of these guys. I can, Tom's done it in spades.
Interesting. You've offered to do a shale demonstrator.
How many times have we made that offer? You know?
And you've had no reply at all. Okay.
It's quite tough engaging, to be honest. But I think it's just a common sense solution, isn't it? Why? I mean, do a demonstration. All the scientists.
Maybe the planets are aligned differently now.
Yeah, no, the planets are different now, but
Sylvia.
But there needs to be some commitment, because what you don't want to do is it's expensive to do this, and we had a team of people who were very committed, and they worked with INEOS and then you have to let them all go. But why do you let them all? You're not letting them go for a good reason, because they've done good work. They've found hydrocarbons. They know how to get it out of the ground. They know it's good for the UK. They know it brings investment and jobs. And then you have to let them all go. And I don't like that.
That's frustrating, yeah.
Yeah, well, doesn't give you a good feeling.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Pfeiffer from the FT as well. I had the same question on fracking, but you've just answered that. So I had a question on succession planning, really. Just wondered if you had thought of succession, since
We're
you're
going to end on death.
IPO the business, what you might do.
Well, it's being journalists keeps us so cheerful, do you think?
Well, I'm going to be here for a while. That's the plan. I'm going to carry on. Who's the chap from Mexico? I'm going to carry on jogging at lunchtime and hopefully be here for a while. So, no, that's no. I try not to think about that. There's a lawyer here called Johnny who keeps worrying about it and chivying Andy and John and I, but we don't like engaging on the subject of death very much. It's not a good subject. No.
Another question from the floor over here. We have a couple of hands.
I would say that INEOS is getting quite large. It was never something that we envisaged, but it is quite a. It is now. It probably, I suspect, in the next couple of years, it'll probably become the largest company in the UK, other than BP and Shell. So, if it's not there already, so it is quite a. I mean, it is a fair question in a way. What's going to happen when you die? It's just, I just don't want to answer it really. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Hi, my name is Javad Qureshi, and I was going to ask you a question about, as you mentioned, you're a Manchester United fan, you're a football fan, you own a team. What is your view of the Manchester United former right back, Gary Neville, saying that perhaps American investment in football presents a clear and present danger to the game?
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is because when Chelsea came up for sale, the three bidders were all American financial institutions. And so they were looking at Chelsea as a financial asset, whereas we looked at it as a community asset. So our view was that we would never, had we bought Chelsea, we would never have owned Chelsea. We would just have been the custodian of Chelsea for a period of time, and then we pass it on. Because it's an asset that's owned by it's like St. Paul's Cathedral. It's a part of the community, and it's not a financial asset. You shouldn't treat it as a financial asset, in my view. And interestingly, they can't invest in the major football clubs in America because America don't allow the venture capitalists to buy sports clubs in America. So they come over to the UK and they buy ours. So I think I have a bit of, I mean, we're sort of fairly, open-minded and cosmopolitan in the UK, really, aren't we, in terms of our general attitude? But, you know, we don't, you know, Abramovich did a good job with Chelsea, and, you know, Henry is it that owns Liverpool? They've done quite a good job with Liverpool. But I think, you know, they are community assets. In Germany, you can't do that sort of thing in Germany. They say they're community assets, and we won't have American venture capitalists buying them and then flogging them on in 5 years' time, because that's inappropriate. So I have a bit of sympathy with that.
And there's someone here, I think, as well. Had a question?
Hi, Sir Jim. Pleasure to meet you. I manage the INEOS relationship with Google. I'm very intrigued to know what the motivation is behind the Grenadier, given how competitive the automotive industry is.
Well, the motivation is we're going to make money out of it. Really. If we don't make money, then we'll be disappointed. So I think we'll make money out of it. The most profitable car in the Mercedes portfolio is a G-Wagon. And, you know, I don't know quite how much it makes, but I suspect it's probably about $1 billion a year. So, you know, I think this will be quite profitable business for us.
Do you think the end of the Defender was a tactical error or a missed opportunity by
Jaguar Land Rover? Yes, I do, because I think it was that central bit of DNA in Jaguar Land Rover that, you know,
connected them to
like the G-Wagon is in Mercedes. You know, the G-Wagon in Mercedes is that, you know, that sort of that bit of a history. You know, the longest running car they've had. It's the DNA. It's strong. It's robust. You know, and everything else revolves around it in a sort of way. And I think the Land Rover was that for Jaguar Land Rover. And the new Land Rover, the new Defender isn't, you know, I mean, it's fine as a car, but it's not a Defender. You're not going to take it off-road.
It's the Range Rover, really.
Not unless if you ever want to come back. Anyway.
Yeah. Lady there?
Sorry.
You said it.
Hi, I'm Mace Haddadine. I'm from Nexent. I would like to ask you on your views around the importance or the impact of diversity in a business, especially in terms of like disruption and kind of growth on the growth journey. And I don't mean by it just like women in our industry, but I mean like diversity of approach.
I don't really understand the question, I'm afraid.
So I think the question is does diversity matter? I think,
what do you mean
paraphrase, within INEOS, is it something that you embrace in terms of both what people look like and their origins, and also their approach, the way that they go at things?
I mean, Andrew, John, and myself are all from the same. We absolutely have no interest of colour, creed, sex, or whatever. All we're interested is people who do well, perform well, and it's a meritocracy. You know, I mean, you know, and that's, in my view. I mean, maybe, you know, in the modern world we're a bit old-fashioned, but it's absolutely a meritocracy. We've got ladies who are seriously good in INEOS who are doing extremely important jobs. You know, some of our chief executives are women.
Chief executives of businesses are women.
Absolutely, and they're outstanding. Really. So, I just sort of, you know, I'm the sort of normal man in the street when it comes to all that stuff, really. Yeah.
Anyone else? Further questions? Gentleman here, and also one at the back.
Good afternoon, Sir Jim. I'm Mahip Singh. I've graduated this summer, and I've started at Centrica, inspired by your career in energy and chemicals. I wanted to ask you, given the world we're in now with environment and emissions being so important, were you at the right place in the right time, and would it be a wise endeavor to try and replicate your success in chemicals as a 20-year-old today?
Oh. Well, I wasn't 20, I was 40. I wouldn't recommend it at the age of 20. No, I mean, the world changes, doesn't it, really? So I don't think you could do what we have done probably today. You know, it's a different world, and you'd probably do it differently. So, you know, it wouldn't be you couldn't copy our path, I don't think. You know.
But presumably you could follow a different one, which had some of the same characteristics, because
you can.
If we think about your career, you were able to spot opportunities that large organisations probably couldn't for various reasons
Yeah,
because
they were
of
unfashionable.
the way they were
managed.
configured.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
You could do that. Those sorts of principles of identifying. I mean, bear in mind, there's a bit more competition now because that's what the world of private equity and venture capital does. It didn't exist when we started. Right? So, there's a lot of people looking at undervalued assets or assets which are modestly valued, which you can then increase the value of. So there's a bit more competition kicking around. But having said that, we continue. As I said, we gave the go-ahead on quite a big acquisition this morning. So, they're still around and we're still playing in that game.
Gentleman at the back.
Well, I've always wanted to say good evening, sir, so I thought I would take the opportunity when it presented itself. You talked about a man, Jeremy Haywood, who I actually worked with a number of years ago, and he always struck me as a man who had the long-term interest of this country at his heart. The politicians came and went, but Jeremy had the long-term vision. You're a man who's had a long-term vision for his company. You've spoken about how individualistic society has become and people wanting everything tomorrow. How do you think that we set this country on the right path and get it thinking for a prosperous long-term future as opposed to wanting everything tomorrow?
That's a big one.
That's quite a big one, yeah. I'm not sure I can solve the world's problems that easily, really.
Just this country, not one of them.
What was that?
Just this country, so start small.
I'm not sure I fully... Can you repeat the question to me, Jonathan? What's the question?
So I think it's about short-termism and long-termism. How do you get people to make long-term plans for the UK? And maybe that's both an individual thing and also a political thing, because
I can answer the political aspect of that.
Which, do you think about Jeremy Haywood and what he...
Yeah. I mean, he really was a proper bloke, Jeremy Haywood, and he was a very smart man, and his interests were always in the interest of the country, which was his job, really. But I mean, my sort of observation on the sort of political aspect of that would be, if you look at the UK is a £2 trillion economy. Right? So in my terms, I look at that as if it were a business, 2 trillion business. So we're 60 or billion or something like that. So it's much, much bigger than INEOS. And the government takes 50% of that in tax revenue, roughly. So the government invests about £1 trillion a year in stuff, right? And, if you say, what's that stuff? It's things like education and health and social security and defence and police and things like that. And we used to do that well, but I don't think we do that so well today. Because we don't have the same rigour.
So it's rigour again. So it's that
we don't have the rigour, and we don't have the same
okay.
long-term view. So if you look at energy, it's a mess. Education is a bit of a shambles, I think. I mean, how many people here send their children to a state school? I suspect it's not many. If you look at health is broken. If you look at policing, it doesn't. I mean, I read an article the other day that Sheffield hasn't solved a single burglary for 3 years. I mean, policing has collapsed. I mean, one of the reasons, to be honest, Monaco, for someone like me, is much safer than, London. I have to look behind me all the time now. I didn't used to have to do that 10 or 15 years ago. But London sold all its... London is selling 50 to 100 police stations a year. I mean, so what happened? So I think, there's a sort of a bit of a...
And can we just stick with that word rigour, which has popped up through the whole of this conversation? And supposing you had a divisional chief executive, one of your subsidiary companies, and they came to you with a growth plan, and they said, we're going to spend all this money, and they couldn't show you any workings as to how they were going to recoup it. What would you say to them?
It would be a very short conversation. No. It would. I mean, that's INEOS, really. But nobody ever would, because they recognise that, that we will be rigorous in interrogating things.
So does it surprise you?
Because that's how you make.
Yeah.
If you're asked how you're successful in business, you have to make most of your decisions you don't have to get them all right, but you have to get most of them right. And the way you get them right is by being rigorous in your understanding and your data and analysis.
So does it surprise you that the markets are asking the same questions about the government's growth plan?
Well, I mean, they've done one or two good things, I think, like the energy cap, but, you know, clearly the budget didn't have a lot of rigor, I'm afraid. I mean, you know, if you're going to give stuff away, there's only two ways of paying for it. You either have to make some savings here, or you're just going to borrow. And you at least need to understand what you're going to do, and if you're going to make some savings, what the savings are. So, you know, you have to balance your books somehow or other. You can't just keep borrowing and showing the national debt up, which is already 1 times GDP in the UK. It's already at over 2 trillion, you know. So, but rigor is fundamental in INEOS, and it's fundamental to our success, 100%. It's my favourite word in business, rigor. Yeah.
What do you think they need to do now?
Other than get more rigorous.
Very good. Well, look,
I think you need to do things well, you know. If you spin things all the time, you never get down to the real. You need to know what the real. If you look at the National Health Service, look at what the real facts are. If you look at education. I mean, when I did A levels, 7% of people got a grade A. Now, bloody hell, 25% of people get a grade A. That doesn't mean education's improved. It just means the politicians have made themselves look better by handing them out like candy, you know. So, I mean, look at the data and, you know, try and understand what your issues are and then come up with a plan to get better. But you can't say our education system's as good as the German or the Belgian or the Dutch or the Swiss. You can't say our health service is as good as the Germans or the Belgian. You know, it's not. We've slipped. And the UK used to be really, really good at those things. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be. You know, if you're running a government, it's not just about pontificating and spending your time on television and fluffing about. You've got you're spending £1 trillion of our money, everybody's money here. You have to spend it well, and you have to be rigorous and do it well, do it properly. And then, you know, we'll get back to where we used to be.
Very good.
Anyway, that's the end of my rant.
Well, no, it was very interesting. And Katie, our floor manager, has been signalling to me to wrap up. Yeah. And it's been a really fascinating conversation. I've enjoyed it thoroughly. We've had some great contributions from the floor as well. So it only really remains to me to thank the audience, both online and in the hall, particularly to thank you, and wish you all a very good evening, and hope you have a very rigorous few days after this. So thank you.
Thank you.